I'm Tim, the Brand Weaver, and this is Branding for Breweries, the podcast that helps you grow your brewery, build a better brand, and connect with more drinkers. Each week, I'm joined by the brightest minds in the beer world, sharing practical tips to help your brewery stand out and sell more beer. Let's get stuck in. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, 24-hour party people. 'Tis I, Tim the Brand Weaver, and we're back with Branding for Breweries. Another phenomenal episode bringing you a delightful guest to help your brewery thrive and do incredible things. And today, I'm joined by a certain somebody from CAMRA, because I don't know if you've been on the interwebs recently, ladies and gentlemen, but CAMRA just dropped a report, and my lordy, it was a doozy. Ultimately, it read, "The UK beer market is broken." And I went, right, that's enough. I need someone to chat to about this, because what can breweries do about it? And they didn't just serve me up anyone from CAMRA. Oh no, they've got me Ash, the chairman from CAMRA. So let's bring Ash in and let's have a chinwag. Ash, how you doing, mate?
Hi, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm really good, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me on the show, man. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Yes. It's not the happiest topic, broken beer, but yeah, it's good to talk about it.
We'll add an element of positivity and constructive advice to this chat, Ash. Uh, Dude, before we get stuck into this, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with who CAMRA are and what they do, but potentially not yourself, bud. Could you maybe give us a little who you are and where'd you come from, blind date-esque intro, and we can get stuck in.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, I'm Ash Culver Collins. I'm the chairman of CAMRA. I have been for almost 2 years now. I've been on our board, our national executive, for about 8 years. It was 2018 when I was elected, and it's all voluntary. Is one of the things people don't realise. So this is something I do around the day job because I'm just so passionate about beer, like everyone else is.
And hats off to you for the voluntary role, man. It is. I do something similar with the London Brewers Alliance, and people go, "It's not paid." It's like, no, not at all. You do it for the love of the beer, my man. Um, so Ash, I suppose let's start with the basics for people who maybe haven't had the time to digest the full CAMRA report. What are the important findings that you really want people to understand from it?
So I think the main thing to understand, and I don't think any of it really comes as a surprise to anyone. And it's not a surprise to us. The point was to get this down on a page and say, look, actually, we can prove this now, prove as much as we know about what we've always thought, which is that essentially, as you said, beer industry in this country is broken, not through the lack of passion, as we talked about, not because many of the independent brewers are doing anything badly, or even the consumers from our side of things are doing anything wrong. What we're finding and what we've always believed and what we're proving is that it is the actions or inactions of government, it's the actions and inactions of the major brewers and the multinationals and the pubcos, which are essentially, making it so hard to run a pub, so hard to run a brewery. They're reducing access to market. We've always known how hard it is, and many of the listeners will know how hard it is to get your beer into pubs. And we're just highlighting why that is the case because of the very obvious tide lines, but also the sort of not so obvious things like the service line agreements that mean you're tied up into certain agreements with certain companies and the loans that people have gotten, or when these breweries buy up all these different amazing small independent brewers, conglomerate it into one big factory somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and then keep telling you, oh yeah, it's the pride of Cornwall brewed up north, or it's the Lake District beer brewed in Wolverhampton, and they're just lying to consumers and they're presenting to people at the bar all these different colourful pump clips, which is essentially, if people remember, the Simpsons joke where they all the different Duff beers, but actually it's just Duff, and they're just lying. It's an illusion of choice at night is a nice way to say it. It's a lie, is what is to say. The other thing, and ultimately that we don't think government are doing enough to combat this. We're calling for a full market investigation from the CMA because we've done as much as we can and said this is what we've always thought. Here's all the evidence we have. But what the next stage is we need the CMA, the Competitions and Market Authority, to use their power to investigate and to sort of what we think will prove what we're saying, and ultimately then allow the government to make legislative choices that will improve it.
Okay. So I suppose the follow-up question is why now? There are other things that are raising awareness for this, but why has CAMRA selected this point to really jump on the back of it and make their feelings known?
To be honest, now because we didn't do it earlier. We wanted to do this, and there are some people who've been involved in this project and this report who've said, look, let's get it out there, let's get it out now. It has taken a little longer than we thought. Probably 2025 would have been the more opportune moment. But I think we're seeing a real sea change in terms of the public's perception. I've spent years and years sort of volunteering and campaigning in this, and you have those conversations with people over a pint, and you say, "Oh, isn't the beer industry terrible? Aren't all these pubs closing terrible?" And they say things like, "Oh, well, it's fine because it's a competitive market and the bad businesses go under and the good businesses survive." And no amount of sort of telling them why that isn't the case doesn't seem to get through. But I think we've noticed the last couple of years that people are getting cheesed off. They're noticing what the real problems are, accepting that it's not a fair market, that it's not just survival of the fittest, but actually you can run a brilliant business, a brilliant brewery, or a brilliant pub and still go under. I think maybe it was a post-COVID change that did that, and people sort of noticed how much they cared about these community businesses and pubs and all that sort of stuff, and so maybe became more invested in it. And I think the other thing is, as an organisation, one of the things, particularly when I stood for chairman and the rest of the board have been trying to change, is that perception that CAMRA maybe doesn't quite use its teeth as much as it should. And maybe in our 50 odd years of history, we've become a little docile and a little conservative. And we run our beer festivals and isn't that nice? And we have a little bit of a moan here and there, but we don't do anything. And, one of those big questions is, what's the point of CAMRA? And as much as I can list all the other things they're not aware of we're doing, sometimes you need to have a big shiny report that says we think this is terrible, we want something done about it. And yeah, the reaction has been exactly what we wanted. I've seen so many publicans, brewers, consumers who've said, oh, this is fantastic, this is what I've been calling for CAMRAs to do for years, isn't this amazing that they're doing this now? And hopefully we can keep doing it. We want to do something looking into the pubs industry next, which is equally as kind of difficult. And there's a lot of sort of unknown problems that we want to shine a light on and get change on.
Nice. So this is a camera with a bit of teeth now, a bit of grip behind it.
That's the idea.
So let's talk about this from a practicality side of things. So like we mentioned, the report says the UK beer market is broken. But what does that actually mean in practical terms for independent breweries when they're trying to sell their beer?
The hardest part, yeah, is trying to sell the beer. So I went and saw this Indian brewery, which is a fantastic independent brewery near me here in Birmingham. And just in the course of having a nice conversation with the guys and showing me around the brewery, I said to them, I said, what is it like getting into the on trade for you? What are your sales like? And they said, look, we'll be honest, we don't really sell in Birmingham. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, we just can't get into the pubs because Birmingham, like a lot of major cities where we've got historically a lot of pubs were owned first by big brewers and now owned by pubcos, where there's already a lot of tied lines, they just don't have that access. No matter how good their beers are, no matter what sort of aggressive selling techniques they might want to run, no matter how much the consumers might say, I really want to drink Indian brewery beers out in my local pub, no matter how much the publican might want to stock their beers, they just can't because they're already spoken for. And the way it works is, as I said, the very obvious thing. If you've got a tied line and it's very obvious it's tied and it's sort of explicitly tied, I think most people understand that model. But it can be that if you work for a pubco, you're a tenant or a manager at a pubco, and you want to put an independent line there, and you speak to someone like Indian Brewery and you say, fantastic, let's get it sorted. And your pubco says, yes, but you have to pay a premium because we don't want you to undercut the sales of our favourite brands that we've got agreements with. And so what should be a straightforward buy product, sell product becomes, well, buy product, sell it, try to sell it for much more than it's going to sell for and ultimately fail because no one wants to spend £7 on a pint because it's a great beer. That's just not achievable at the moment. And there's so many of these. It's what we know is, unfortunately, and this is where we run into difficulties. When you try and make a case that there's something broken in a system, people try to. The point you have to prove is the market being dominated by a single player? And the beer industry is not dominated by a single player. It's dominated by 4 or 5 very big players, and they've all got a slice of the pie each. And they've sort of sat on it, and they say, right, okay, Big Brewery X has 20% of the market, and Big Brewery Y has 15% of the market, and they don't need to really compete with each other. They know they've got 80% of the market sewn up in this manner. And as long as they just keep carrying on and they keep pumping their overpriced beer, being forced to be sold by publicans, but that, and then the consumer has to drink it, and that's fine for them because then the shareholders are still happy, and there's marginal moves. It's a bit like people have read 1984, and there's always a war going on, but never quite really a war going on, and it's that there's no actual competitiveness in the market because they're fine with it and they're happy to do this, and yet in this country we have, I think, what, 1,400, 1,500 independent brewers who want to get into the market, who are demonstrating innovation, who consumers we know want to drink, and are just not being offered that opportunity.
Now, I take all of that on board, but when I look at it from a indie brewer's perspective, it would be so easy for the indie brewer to be like, well, we can't do anything about that. We need governmental involvement. We need industry reform. But there's got to be something that breweries can do to help better their chances through all of this. What would you be recommending?
It's really tough. And this is one of the things where I've been thinking about what can breweries do, because you're right, because our biggest belief is that this is going to take legislative change in some manner. When we see in Scotland, and they've had the guest beer right come in, and that has improved the situation north of the border, where independent brewers are now able to get into pubs, not perfectly, but it is better than the situation was. In terms of what can breweries be doing to keep improving the situation, I think the biggest thing is campaigning themselves. I think I get it. I get that running a business is full time. It's 24 hours a day to run a brewery, and to say, oh, can you do some campaigning on top of that is quite a lot. I spoke to a publican the other day who was interested in getting involved in camera. I said, oh, we're setting up this thing that you'd be really interested in. He said, look, I'll be honest, I don't have the time because I'm trying to, he's dealing with his landlord, which is an issue, and he's dealing with all these other issues. And he said, look, I'd love to, but I don't have the time. So I get that when it comes to breweries, it is really difficult and finding that time. But I think the biggest thing they can be doing is to convert their customers into champions and campaigners themselves. Because as much as Camera is sort of pushing this message and we're getting it out there and we've done this report, we're only hitting so much of the market. We accept that, people who've got 140,000 members, but there are 3 million people who drink beer in this country. So how do we get that 2.5 million more that are on the table? I think that's where publicans and brewers can come in, can be highlighting the issues. They can get their customers to be aware that the reason you can't drink Indian brewery beers in a lot of pubs in Birmingham is because they can't sell to them, and making sure people understand that message, that we have an army of millions of campaigners who can push and get legislative change. The good example, I met an MP not that long ago, and we were sort of chatting, and I said, look, I take you through the beer report. I was saying about what all the issues were and all that sort of stuff. And he was quite frank with me. And he said, okay, how many of my constituents are pub goers? How many are camera members? How many breweries do I have in my constituency? What is their capacity of what they're brewing? When it comes to politics, you need to demonstrate why it matters to the politician. And that ultimately only comes from volume. When you say, look, this matters to all of your constituents. So it matters to all the businesses in your local area. This is about economic growth. This is about votes ultimately. And if we can get the breweries to sort of push that for us as well, and we can, one united front, then hopefully we can convince politicians that they need to change things.
Okay, so say a brewery's like, right, we're going to educate, we're going to empower our drinkers so they know more about it. What do they need to do off the back of that? Okay, we're going to all put our names on a piece of paper and say we want good indie beer on the taps. How does it work from that point onwards?
Good question. You know, campaign. Sometimes it takes decades. Is I suppose the hard thing to say. Sometimes you suddenly see change. So we've had a new prime minister, and he's turned around already, and he's said, "Oh, we're going to do something about business rates," and he seems to be taking a very I care about what people care about. Making your bills cheaper, making the pub more affordable, whatever it might be. So that's that little sort of moment where we go, okay, what can we leverage here? If we've got someone who's saying the right things, we need to take advantage of that and sort of build on that now and push while we've got that opportunity. So yeah, the next moment I think is really pushing really hard to get this full market review and investigation. If we don't get that, then we sort of pivot and say, okay, well, what's the next step? Well, we start campaigning and lobbying MPs directly so that they can push for it and say this is what the constituents care about. And then Camera will continue to have conversations with decision makers. I meet with ministers regularly, and so do our staff, and keep pushing and say this issue isn't going to go away. You could ignore it, you can put your fingers in your ears, but we're going to keep knocking on the door. The brewers are going to keep knocking on the door. The publicans are going to knock on the door. The customers are going to knock on the door. SEBA are going to knock on the door. You're going to get everyone until you admit that there is a problem. And that's the hardest bit, is getting them to admit there's a problem.
And you referenced SEBA there. I just wanted to get some clarity around. You've got SEBA, you've got the Independent Beer Campaign, you've now got CAMRA who's flagging this. So you're waving the same flag. How do they work in parallel? Is it just a bigger voice at this point, or are there differences between the two?
So what's going to be differences? Our organisations and all these different groupings always have a slightly different viewpoint. We are the consumers champion. So I always sort of say to people, okay, well, you've got SEBA, who are the brewers champion. You've got us, who are the consumers champion. You've got people who are pub champions. Ultimately, we all want pubs open, serving independent beer and all that sort of stuff. But how we might achieve it is always a little bit nuanced. You know, but you find the things you can work together on more. Sorry, I've stumbled over words there. What I'm trying to say is, I think we can put aside the slight differences. I think that's been a change in our organisations, maybe in the last 5 or so years, where it was always almost you wanted the credit. And I still get it now when we do things and people say, oh, why wasn't CAMRA leading this? Why is it SEBA doing that? It doesn't matter. We all want the outcome, which is, fairer pints, better choice on the bar and things like that. But ultimately, whoever takes the credit doesn't matter as long as we get the change. And I think that is something that everyone in the industry has recognised. Maybe things are just worse now. We can't mess about arguing about the little things. We need to work together on the big things.
Mm. Do you think there are other drinks industries that might be doing it a little bit better? Like, I know when we spoke previously, we said the wine industry. You don't hear about this being as much of an issue with the wine industry. So where can we draw comparisons, and what could we take from them to help this situation?
I think the big thing was beer. Without having a time machine, beer missed its moment. I think in the was it the 90s, where wine and they'll bring in some changes, and wine sort of positioned itself. I don't know by design or sort of coincidence, but it positioned itself as this premium product, and they got themselves exempt from certain things that they could do the tastings and all that sort of stuff, rather than having to serve it always in full measures, and it really got pushed as this interesting, amazing product. And beer has always suffered from, well, it's just something you swill with your mates and get it down you, and you don't really think about it in terms of taste and flavors and even mouthfeel and everything. That started to change, and I think we've learned that in the last 10, 15 years or so, and you get all these people who are passionate about beer, and they talk about it more than just being a liquid, but being a passionate and artisanal product. I think what we can learn is sort of accepting that there's a wide range. I've noticed in beer in my time doing this, there's almost been a little bit of infighting of, okay, well, if you like real ale, well, it's boring and brown and twiggy, and if you like craft beer, then it's extra fizzy and hoppy and too cold and all this sort of stuff. And you sort of go, but we all care about the same things. And I've never heard in wine. Maybe it's because I'm not involved in wine as much, or spirits or anything like that. But whenever there seems to be big problems in those industries, they seem to talk with one voice and do it together, and get the change or avoid the problems that they thought they were going to have. Whereas in beer, we sort of pointed the finger at each other and said, well, you're not on my side because you don't like the same thing as me exactly. And what we've resulted in is almost this kind of splitting of beer. You've got people who describe themselves as a craft beer fan, or they describe themselves as a real ale. And you think, we just like beer. We like
Mm.
pubs, and we need to be working together on that.
I see what you mean. I suppose that unity, and it comes back to well, it doesn't matter who's going to take the praise for it. Like, if we all get behind the idea of beer and independent beer, and we want more of that available, the argument becomes a lot easier, doesn't it? Versus going, I'm fighting for this particular category or this particular style of beer.
It does. We still have the issue today where some people argue that, and I've witnessed it, where they don't want to talk to certain groups, or get involved in certain companies or whatever. Like, I think there needs to be a better acceptance that sometimes you have shared problems and you work together. Sometimes you oppose each other on an idea, and that doesn't mean you have to hate each other. You can never work together because you don't like what company A does about certain things, or what group B thinks about certain things. If problem C is what you're trying to solve together, then focus on doing that, and hopefully we can get that change we need. And I think the vast majority of people see it that way, but there's still some very loud people who sort of want to fight each other rather than fight the problems.
So if let's split this into two markets. Obviously, you talk about you're the consumer champion, but you've had a lot of responses from breweries to this report as well. If breweries are looking to do something about this in the next 90 days, like what are the practical things that you'd be asking breweries to do to help champion this? You talk about educating their drinkers, but realistically, how would you like to see them go about doing that?
The important thing is to embody the things that we know are important to consumers and kind of, act in a way that demonstrates what the big brewers should be doing. So for us, that is screaming loud and proud about their independence, about the provenance of their beer, that you are still brewed in the town that you say you are. Talk to us about, because we're seeing so much of these sort of faux foreign beers where they put a branding on it, and or as I said before, where you get a conglomerate has bought up all these brands and claims they're from somewhere. What we need the independent brewery sort of sector to do is to actually demonstrate truth. And so, yeah, loud and proud about where you're from, what you're brewing, the stuff that's in your beer, and to push this sort of problem and point out where they see the problems.
And has the response to the report almost changed how you see your relationship with breweries versus how it could have
Yeah,
been previously?
I think it's definitely improved things. Immediately as soon as we put this out, we had so many breweries contacting us, either using their social media or getting in touch with us directly or privately to say, "Oh, this is what we need to see. This has changed things." And even sort of sometimes breweries or individuals where we knew the relationship wasn't as strong as it could be. Maybe they had some issues with us in the past, all that sort of stuff. It's definitely improved things that way and demonstrated what CAMRA can and should be. And I think shown people that we are fighting, that we are doing things, that we're not just sort of moaning into our pints and going quietly into the night, as it might be thought. So yeah, I think it's been a really positive change, and we'd like that to continue. I think what we'd like to understand is what every brewer thinks. If they could get in touch with us and say, "Oh, we agree, and we'd like to back this campaign," and we'll find ways to work together and support, either if it's through SEBA and people going up through that way, or directly getting in contact with us. We want to use this as an opportunity to reset the relationships with many brewers and publicans and people across the industry and say, "Look, we're here, we're fighting. Let's get together and do something."
Love it. And I suppose this is the perfect opportunity to talk about, like, you guys, and when I say you guys, I mean CAMRA. You've got huge membership power, political influence, but maybe a lot of that it's a bit quiet. People don't necessarily know what's going on behind the curtains, and then there's this confusion that you're just moaning into a pint somewhere in a dark corner of a pub. So what do breweries need to understand about the influence that CAMRA actually has on the industry and what it can help breweries achieve?
It's a good point, because I think that is the question I get the most. It's either what's the point of CAMRA or what is CAMRA doing, and it's very hard sometimes to talk about what we're doing, because we've taken the approach over years now to maybe not be as angry. I've talked about us having teeth in this, but actually we're not screaming in the corner saying, "Look at us," and "Isn't everything terrible?" We've always been a let's engage in conversation and get things changed that way as a campaigning method. So a lot of what we do just isn't in the public eye. As I said before, I meet with ministers regularly. Our staff, we've got 40 odd staff employed by CAMRA, and our campaigning team are going and meeting with ministers or contacting them, and we're engaging our 140,000 members to lobby their MP directly, either getting them to go and meet them or sending them emails. And so much of what we do is sort of just isn't that. And until you get a change, you can't point at something, because there's not much point just saying a big headline saying, "Oh, Ash Collins, chairman, went to meet minister again today." And go, "Great, why?" Like, what was the change? And and I've been having these meetings and discussions about things that are in the beer report, and the staff have been doing that. And it might be in 12 months, 24 months, we get something that we can point at. For example, the access to market review that was put into the budget, October 2024. We know that is on the minister's desk. That's what she said to us when we spoke. We said, "Look, what's going on with this?" She said, "Look, it's done basically. There are some bits and pieces, but it's not ready to be published yet." Unfortunately, then she was waiting on a change of prime minister, finding out whether she was going to be in a job post recess. So she said, "Look, I can't do anything with this." And so our job is to sit there and sort of every week just go, "Are you doing it? Are you sending it? You're gonna publish it and remind you." And then other friends who are interested in this, SEBA and other organisations, they're going to keep badgering you. And so much of it is that sort of slow millimeter crawl of getting things done, and unfortunately means we can't point to go, "Oh, we achieved this week, and every so often we get little things and we shout about them, but it does look like we're not doing a lot in the middle. But it's because we're sort of using every bit of our reach to drag ourselves into that fight.
Yeah, it's the accountability and the poking and the pushing that does take time, I suppose, to make any
Yeah,
change. You can't
and
expect it overnight.
and you see it from other organisations, and I actually appreciate what they do. But the approach we don't take is to be very social media heavy and very shouty. And you see it. We've seen a couple of organisations in similar sort of interests as ours go online, and they take the role of, well, when it was Keir Starmer, oh, this is terrible. When the business rates in the last budget sort of got announced before they sort of rode back a little bit, we immediately got on the phone to the Treasury and quietly were saying, you do realise why this is a terrible problem. After all the conversations we've had, this is and using our influence to talk directly to the ministers and civil servants involved. Whereas other organisations were doing the shout on Facebook thing and saying, oh, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and calling them names, all this sort of stuff. Camera can't do that, because if we started doing that, then they're not going to keep picking the phone up to us and having the conversations when we try to do that. But I do appreciate those other organisations doing it, because they sort of get to be the lightning rod for the anger, and then we be the gentle push at the open door now that they've seen the emotional reaction.
Yeah, they complement one another very nicely.
Yeah.
But having said that, Ash, the new report, it is maybe a little bit more bullish. Even the social stuff that's coming out of the camera account now is a little bit more, well, it's raising some eyebrows, I suppose. I've seen some people like respond to it going, oh, is this the right thing? Is this the kind of evolution that we can expect to see in terms of how cameras communicating publicly?
This was one of the first things when I took over I wanted to change, because we had a budget very quickly after I took over, and we had a conversation and said, okay, what do you want your chairmanship to be? What do you want, any changes you want to see? And I said, well, in communication, actually, a big thing I said was, sometimes we're too friendly. As I said, we talk about, well, actually, you need to be nice to government ministers and shake their hand, and sometimes spend time with people you wouldn't want to spend time with, because you need them to make the right decision. But that doesn't mean, I thought, that we should let them think they're always doing the right thing. It's almost it's a nuance. It's about being a critical friend. So, for example, when we used to have in budgets gone by, they'd say, "Oh, 1p off on duty," and then the Sun would slap it on their front page and say, "Oh, the Chancellor's saved pubs with 1p off, and everyone, it's going to be golden roses everywhere, and isn't this amazing?" And Camera always used to then immediately our statement would be, "Oh, we thank you very much for giving us 1p off, but actually we'd like you to do some other." I said that's not good enough, because what people read is Camera thanks you for 1p off. And then I have conversations with MPs who go, "Oh yeah, but we gave you the 1p off," and I go, "That's nothing. If you think that achieves something, no." So I said we need to be very careful when we do get good things. Great, make sure we sing the praises, because all governments want and all MPs want is to be told they're doing the right things. It looks good to their voters and they get voted back in. So I said, absolutely, if they're doing the right thing, we'll do that. But if they're giving us crumbs and expecting us to be thankful, then as an organisation, we need to turn around and say, no, that isn't good enough. And when it comes to with this report, and we went back and forth on the language we were going to use, and we went through a lot of lawyers about the language we were going to use. You have to be very careful about this sort of thing, and what you're accusing people of, and what you're saying the industry is. But we made sure, we said with the tone, it has to be combative. It has to show that we are passionate about this, that we're not going to accept the current status quo, and that we want change. And I didn't want there to be any uncertainty about that. It couldn't be a report that said, oh, things aren't great. It had to be angry. It had to rile people up and get the reaction we've had from our own members, as well as publicans and brewers, because I need them to. Sometimes I get the hardest question from them is, oh, I don't know what I should be campaigning about, and what's the point? Here you go. We've written your report. We're going to send it to everyone. We'll send it to MPs. We're going to shout about this, for the next 12 months. This is what we need to be angry about, and this is what we need to focus our attention on.
And I'd be interested to know from like a consumer perspective, because again, there is a stereotypical picture that people have of a camera member. With this step change in terms of communication and how you're putting messaging out there, are you seeing a response from a different demographic of a newer member joining up?
We've actually had direct joiners from this. People have opened the report and then clicked the big button that says join camera and get involved. So it's already having that sort of direct impact, which is fantastic. I think in terms of the reaction, it has definitely skewed maybe away from what people would expect a typical camera member to be. But then I think that's because a lot of the reaction has been online, where it's typically been brewers, consumers, all that sort of stuff. Who Instagram's the big one I've seen a lot of people on and commenting on. And yeah, if this can change our image as well, that'd be fantastic because. As a consumer and membership organization, we thrive and survive on getting people who are passionate about this to get in touch and join us and spend a little bit of money on being a member. It is only about 30 quid a year. But that 30 quid a year pays for what we do. It pays for the report. It pays for those staff who work so hard. It pays for all the kind of facilities to make sure the volunteers can get campaigning. So, yeah, I think it's been really good to sort of invigorate potential members and grow the organisation.
Mm. So let me do a little bit of a recap then, because I like to think what we picked up on here is if you're an indie brewer, and obviously you agree with what Camera are trying to do here, it's going to benefit every indie brewery going. It's about educating your client base, your drinkers about the plight of the situation. But also you talk about really hammering home the location aspect and going, no, we are genuinely from here. But the other thing you touched on, of course, is actually opening up that communication channel between brewery and Camera itself. And is that with the intention to give you more information and make it just make you more aware from a brewery's perspective of what's going on? Or are you looking for something else from that communication?
I think it's a couple of things. I think communication and information is vitally important. As I said, we're a consumer organisation. We know what our members think. We ask them all the time. They've told us what they're passionate about. We know they're passionate about seeing independent beer on the bar and keeping prices affordable. That's what we campaign about mainly. But we do have a little bit of a blind spot. Like I said, we speak to SEVA, we speak to other organisations, but we're not a brewery organisation. We're not a publican organisation. So the more we can hear from people where they tell us, we know the broad picture, but what we don't maybe always have is the detail. So what we'd love to hear is publicans and brewers talking to us and saying, yeah, I recognise a lot of the report. That's my situation. But actually, here's the nuance of what I'm dealing with as a brewer. This is, how I'm struggling, and the more we can build up that case through, the more it helps us because that's what we get when we go and talk to decision makers as well. Is they say, okay, yeah, it might be bad, but what's it actually like? Have you got information? Can you prove to us that this is happening? Have you got publican A who's going to tell us they're not allowed to buy this? Have you got publican B who's going to tell us that their license tied? Have you got brewer C who's going to tell us about why they can't sell? Because you can see it in their faces. When I talk to the minister of the week and I use that example of Indian Brewery, you notice her sort of suddenly go, oh, this is a anecdote is powerful about changing people's minds because they can see it's actually happening, it's actually impacting a business, and it brings to life that story. So yeah, the more information we can get, the more we can sort of build that database, build our campaigning aspects, and really hammer home the point of not only do we think this is happening on a piece of paper, it is happening in the real world. It is affecting brewers, it's affecting publicans, it's affecting consumers, and they're not getting what they want on any side of the bar. But you're right. The other thing is just building that relationship. I think as an organisation, we've probably we've been naive to think we didn't need to engage others as much as maybe we need to. So yeah, what I'd like to see the organisation do more is grow our relationships with brewers and see us as friends, not just the person who makes your beer and they're involved in the process somewhere. They are just as passionate as us. They're just as interested, and we've all got shared interests in this.
Well, here's hoping people listening to the show, you might get a couple of people reaching out to you, Ash, and being like,
Hopefully.
yep, this is what's wrong and this is what I'm struggling with, mate. I'd like a nice little vent, I'm sure of it. Ash, I know that you say like a lot of cameras roll as little small incremental nudges and points and reminders, but as we look forward over the next couple of years, obviously the report is a big flag in the sand of what you're trying to aim to achieve. But what else can we expect from Camera over the next few months and years?
So, our main focus at the moment has been this access to market. Hopefully, we're going to see when the summer recess is over that published. We don't know what that report contains because that will sort of decide what angle we're going to take. What we hope is that that report comes out and they say, yes, we recognise there is a problem. We're not expecting it to come up with solutions at that point, and we were very careful when we inputted to it to not come up with solutions because we've seen in the past when we've done campaigns, things like the beer orders where we said this is what needs to change, and then they changed it and then all the pubcos went, but we know how to get around this change you've come up with. So we were very careful not to immediately say what the change needs to be. But we'd love to see the access to market published, that they tell us that there is a problem, and that the government tells us the next steps. Ideal scenario, they say, yes, we're going to do a proper market investigation, we're going to use the full powers of the CMA because we agree with you, there is a problem here. Probably more likely is they'll say, it's not perfect, but it's not a priority right now. And so then we sort of ramp up our campaigning there. We talk to our friends across the industry, publicans, brewers, whatever it might be, and say, right, how do we, as one voice, say, you've recognised there's a bit of a problem. You can't just put this in a box and ignore it because your voters and your constituents care about it. And then worst case scenario is they say, here's the report. No, there's no problems whatsoever. Everything's working perfectly, and isn't the price of a pint amazing? Which, to be fair, is what I've heard from some people. And I don't know if they're just sort of trying to play devil's advocate, but you sort of get there. There's loads of choice, and I went on holiday to this place, and I only paid £5.50 for a pint, so it's fine, isn't it? And you go, no. So we'll see. So yeah, so what we do about that depends on what happens. Hopefully, the report comes out. If it doesn't come out at all, then we continue to scream, "Where's the report?" And then I think I mentioned before, we'd like to do a report like this on the pubs industry, which is the other side of the same coin, because you can't get change that will improve things for brewers without getting change that improves things for publicans. And we all recognise on every side of the bar that there is a problem, that there are issues in the industry, that things aren't being done in a way that makes it fair or makes it even viable for some publicans to run a business. And so without publicans, there's no brewing industry. So, yeah, the next 12 months is going to be right. We've learned from this report. I think I said this. It took longer than we thought it would. It was new to us to have to do this sort of report. It's new to us to have to send something through lawyers so much and all that sort of it was almost a discovery each stage. You go, okay, right. And then we press publish and I go, no, now you do this bit. And I go, okay, and now we put no, now you do that. And so, step by step. So next time it'll be a lot quicker, a lot more efficient. We've learned things. So yeah, we'd like to do a deep dive into the pub industry. And then I guess after that is working out how do we marry those two things together? Because I think that will give us 4 or 5 big asks that we're going to want over the next 5 years. And then we work out, okay, how are we going to hammer the government and the devolved governments to get the change we need? How are we going to utilize our friends across the industry to get the change we need? And how are we going to use the several million people who love pubs and beer to get the change we need?
I mean, it's a big ask, but you've got the power behind you, bud. So all power to you, mate.
That's the plan.
So I suppose, Ash, as we bring this to a close, if there are breweries listening and go, yeah, we do want to be able to educate our drinkers a little bit more, where should we be pointing them towards to get that information? And secondly, if you are encouraging breweries to open up that dialogue and conversation with CAMRA, what's the best way to go about doing that?
So I think the main thing is, we've got this report. Obviously, I'm not saying give it to all your customers or accost them at the bar every time they buy a pint and hand over a nice printed up laminated copy. But I think it's starting with those conversations. If you've got regulars who come in that you recognise, you think, right, so and so here is a beer lover, just start that conversation. So it's educating your staff so that they can have those conversations, and then having those conversations with your customers, and just getting people aware, getting them interested. And if they're recognizing that someone says, "Oh God, that is terrible," tell me more. Point to them. We've got so many resources now on our website, so people just search CAMRA and go on there. The team spent so much time building what are brilliant resources, so you don't have to read the full report. You can just go on and get the snippets, and it's interactive, and there's all information on there, and there's some quizzes and things like that. So if you've got someone interested, get them on there, get them looking at that. And then if they want to take it to the next step, it's quietly encourage them to join CAMRA. As I said, it's a bargain at just over 30 quid a year. But if they're not interested in joining us, we don't need people to be. We do need members, but if people are interested but don't want to make that financial commitment, we're more than happy to take people as campaigners regardless. And so, yeah, get in touch with us, and we'll support people if they want to be a campaigner on this sort of stuff. And when it comes to the brewers, just get in touch with us directly. My email address is just my name, so ash.corbett-collins at camera.org.uk. I'm more than happy to kind of take those, or just our campaigning team at campaigns at camera.org.uk, and just get in touch and say, you know what, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm struggling, I want to make a difference, I want to make a change, and we will find a way to support. What I don't want people to take away is there's a sort of binary, you're either in CAMRA and you're full-time campaigner, or you're not. There is so much on that journey, even if it is just giving us an email with an anecdote and saying, look, I want to share what my scenario is, and that's it, and it doesn't go any further. That's more than enough. If they say, look, we'd like to get a copy of the report, or we'd like to host an event where, we'll come and get people and involved. Because we saw that a brewery near me, Attic Brewery, down in Sturchley, they hosted their local MP and a couple of decision makers and sort of made the point about what access to market is and stuff like that. If we could get every brewery to call in their local MP and just get on the phone and say, my business is struggling, you have a decision to make on how to support it. And MPs love a photo opportunity. If you say, look, you can come down, you bring your camera and show everyone that you're talking to us. If we got that in all 600 odd constituencies, fantastic. That's every MP being told there's a problem. So there's just so many things. And so, yeah, I don't want people to think it's all or nothing. Get in touch with us. We'll find innovative ways that fit around their schedules, that fit around what they've got available, that fit around how much they want to do. But we'll find a way to support them and bring them into this fight with us.
Fantastic, Ash. Well, all of the links, all the email addresses, we'll make sure go in the show notes so people can reach out and engage however they see suitable. All that's left for me to say, Ash, is thanks so much for your time, mate. It's been really interesting, like digging into the report and what can be done about it. So thanks for your time. For all the listeners who've tuned in today, or indeed in the future, thank you very much for your time as well. Stay tuned to Branding for Breweries, because there's going to be a load more amazing guests just like Ash coming up. I'll see you on the other side. Cheers, Ash.
Thanks.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch, because I want to chat to you. Rock on!